He who rises early, God gives to. You probably know this proverb. I'll say that the mass of health coaches, nutritionists, and other such preventive doctors even say that you need to get up as early as possible, and then you will be healthier, smarter, more beautiful, and life will be successful in general. But let's figure out if this is true. Watch this video to the end. I'll tell you how you can determine your chronotype. You are an owl or a lark, and accordingly, in connection with this and the chronotype, decide when it is best for you to get up. I would like to quote you a quote from one of the sites that talked about the benefits of getting up in the morning, early in the morning. From late rising, a person can become ill. Blood pressure, immunity, mental functions are disrupted. And on the contrary, when a person gets up early, optimism rises with the sun. Early rising helps to get rid of depression, increases vitality, strengthens immunity and memory. In addition, there is an opportunity to overcome life's obstacles. Well, it seemed like some kind of panacea for all troubles. There is such a book, Morning Magic by Hal Elrod. It is widely quoted on the internet. Some of my patients referred to it. And there are 6 practices described there that if you wake up early in the morning and apply them, then everything in life will be fine. By the way, if you have read this book and even more so applied the practices like this video, well, let's go through everything in order. First, yes, of course, the mode is important. We are diurnal creatures, and we have the internal so-called circadian rhythms, which are tuned to a certain extent to the change of day and night. That is, we should sleep at night and accordingly be awake during the day. But the copies break down in that sense. And where does this start in the morning? Well, if you get up with the sun, for example. It seemed like a proper recommendation. But take the equator, where we have 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. So what, people should sleep for 12 hours? Well, listen, this is practically above the norm. So on average, it's still 8 hours. At the equator, the sun rises at around 7 a.m., which is normal. However, by 7 p.m., it's already dark. So you probably need to go to bed at 7 in the evening. That seems a bit early. Next, let's take the northern countries, where we even have a polar day and a polar night. And there, how to get up and go to bed with the sun is also unclear. And actually, this recommendation to get up with the sun, it's not entirely correct. Of course, sunlight is such a good timer that allows us to activate our biological processes. And again, a person is a diurnal creature, and his activity, it mainly manifests itself during the day. But with the advent of civilization, we can completely calmly deceive our organism. That is, if we take a bright artificial light and such a white office light, somewhere 5,500, 6,500 kelvins, color temperature, it is measured in kelvins. If we affect a person with such light, then the brain will understand that it is day. And beautifully, let's say, into the same polar night, or when we have long winter evenings, if we use, let's say, a light alarm clock that will wake us up, and photons of light will hit our eyes, and our morning will start at the same 5, 6, or 7 o'clock in the morning, then the brain will beautifully think that the morning has started. Generally speaking, it's still dark. But there is also the opposite situation. And suppose if we had a blackout and slept until 10 in the morning, then the brain would think that it's still night until 10 in the morning. And then we only open the curtains and the brain sees, or rather the eyes see the light, and the brain thinks it's morning. So, taking into account civilization, taking into account that people live both where we have the equator and where we have practically polar day and polar night, that is beyond the polar circle, the sun itself is not so important in how we live. Well, what about the people who live on Earth? And how do astronauts live in space? There, it's 45 minutes day and 45 minutes night. And there, where you get up with the sun, do you get up every 45 minutes? Well, that too, you understand, it's nonsense. Here's the main conclusion. It's not so important when the sun rose, but when it's set. The main thing is to stick to the regime. Ideally, this should coincide with daylight hours, predominantly when the sun is out. All life processes are activated in the sun. But let's also take, for example, just Moscow and remember the summer, June. It starts to get light at 3:45. The sun rises at 4:15, so all of Moscow should get up at 4:15 and go for a walk, as, by the way, they write in these books that you should go for a run in the morning. It will be all beautiful. But I didn't see at 4:15 in the morning that half of Moscow was running in the parks. Actually, people are using blackout curtains to sleep until at least 7 a.m. And those who don't use blackout curtains, the light hits their eyes through not very thick curtains. A person wakes up at 4 in the morning, can't fall back asleep, then they get up all shattered. Well, because effectively the second half of the night is spoiled by the excessive light. So the second task, which we need to do, first is the regime, and second, we need to ensure the light accompaniment of our sleep and wakefulness. And what should this result in? It should be dark when we sleep at night and light during the day. For example, I have people who work with Southeast Asia but live in Moscow. They need to get up at 3 in the morning, and if they go to bed late, it's clear that they simply won't get enough sleep. They need to go to bed at 7 in the evening. At 7 p.m., especially in summer, it's still light out. What do? Well, on my recommendation, they start wearing sunglasses that both reduce the light and remove the blue spectrum. The brain usually senses that it's getting darker. Melatonin production begins at 6 p.m. After 5 p.m., the brain perceives it's getting darker. At 7 in the evening, a person goes to bed, closes the curtains, creates a blackout, and accordingly sleeps. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, of course, it's dark everywhere, but the light alarm clock goes off, gradually increasing the brightness and accordingly telling the brain that morning is coming. Melatonin production is supplied. At 3:45, a person normally gets up. Bright lighting is turned on, these 5.5, 6,500 kelvins, and the brain understands that it's day. A person resides in Moscow but lives by Hong Kong time. He goes to bed at 7 in the evening, gets up at 3 in the morning, follows a regimen, and all hormones adjust to this regimen. That is, it would seem this is just to get up early, to manage a lot. So they still go to bed at 7 p.m., correct? But the second situation is the opposite. I have, for example, artists, people of free professions who love to work in silence so that no one would call them, no one would disturb them. Or, for example, if they are artists, they perform somewhere and a person goes to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning or even at 3 o'clock in the morning, but regularly. Before this, he is in a lit space and the brain understands that it is actually daytime. At 3 o'clock in the morning or at 2 o'clock in the morning, the blackout curtains are closed. The brain understands that night has come, falls asleep, and until 10 in the morning, the curtains are closed and the brain thinks it's night. And only at 10 in the morning, when the alarm clock rings and a person opens the curtains, the brain understands that morning has come, melatonin production is reduced, and the person actively continues their day. Although in fact having slept the same, let's say, 8 hours. That is, it doesn't matter if you went to bed, for example, at 6, 7 in the evening and got up at 3 or 4 in the morning, or you went to bed at 2 in the morning and got up at 10 in the morning. The main thing is to observe the regime, the required amount of sleep time that you will sleep. And again, when you sleep, it should be dark, and when you wake up, it should be light. Thus, by observing the regime and light conditions, we beautifully adjust our brain to the new regime. In general, a person is a creature that can adjust its biological clock. We are here today, and tomorrow we fly to Vladivostok. And where are we there? Up to 12 after 12, where is it morning? In Vladivostok, you need to wake up 7 hours earlier than in Moscow. Of course, at first a person will feel uncomfortable, but literally in 7 to 10 days, a person will adjust their biological clock and start waking up according to Vladivostok time, feeling great, even though it turns out that he started getting up 7 hours earlier and going to bed 7 hours earlier. In general, I want to say that the disruption of circadian rhythms is essentially when a person himself sets a reckless regime, when he has shift work, when, one way or another, some social obligations require the need not to sleep at night, but, for example, to rest during the day. Unfortunately, this often leads to disruption of circadian rhythms and the development of insomnia. And if this situation often repeats, then insomnia can become chronic with the development of conditioned reflexes of fear of not falling asleep. The bed insomniac negative forecasting, when a person thinks that's it, insomnia will be forever and has ruined his life. Staying in bed for extended periods while trying to sleep can worsen insomnia. That is, such a chronic conditioned reflex insomnia develops, which then, regardless of what caused it, can last for months and years. I successfully treat such chronic insomnias using a program of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And in a month and a half, I cure long-standing or even decades-long insomnias, usually without the use of any medications. In the description to this video, you can find a link to Dr. Buzunov's insomnia treatment program. This is my author's program. And if you have any problems, especially chronic sleep disorders, reach out. I can effectively help you.
Roman, you often talk about how the rise doesn't matter. The key is maintaining a consistent schedule. But at the same time, I often hear from doctors who say that, yes, you really need to lie down until 10, you need to sleep. Where does this come from?
Unfortunately, in our medical institutes and universities, they still do not teach somnology. They do not teach circadian rhythms. Well, that is, they do not teach the physiology of normal sleep. Where do doctors get their knowledge from? Also from some kind of popular literature? Well, there are some books written by some authors saying that it's beneficial to get up at 5 in the morning, so a doctor reads such a book, starts to believe in it. He simply isn't familiar with any scientific data on this. And here you go, perhaps. This is how such myths are born. You know, it's a myth that if your teeth are squeaking, it means you have worms. It also came from there. Doctors then learned from somewhere. Now it's not so easy to figure out. But such myths are born not only in the heads of ordinary people, but also in doctors. Also often, well, some health coaches and even doctors sometimes say that morning is the best time for physical exercises. Exercises. Here I must warn, I am a person who has been involved in cardio rehabilitation for quite a long time, especially after a myocardial infarction, that it's not so simple with this physical load in the morning. If a person wakes up in the morning and immediately gives himself a high-intensity load and the body has not yet woken up, this can potentially increase the risk of some serious cardiovascular complications. And if you've decided to physically exert yourself in the morning, there's a rule that yes, you can go for a walk, literally right away, but if you want to give a high-intensity load, first, not earlier than half an hour after waking up, and second, warm up into it, not so that you immediately jumped into a sports costume and there with the speed of a sprinter ran somewhere uphill. This can lead to incidents of angina, especially in older age groups. So you need to be a little more careful with this. Overall, if we talk about the ideal time for exercise, it's best to do this exercise after work because it effectively, so to speak, metabolizes stress hormones. That is, the stress that you've accumulated, you can effectively remove it later with physical exercise. And if you're at work and if you're talking about tea and after work, I don't finish at all, I don't have time, and then there's no social life. In this situation, yes, you can exercise in the morning. That is, I usually tell my patients that if you have to choose between nothing and the morning, it's better in the morning. But if there is a chance to train in the second half of the day, it's better to train in the second half of the day. And in this sense, it's also important to consider the circadian rhythms of owls and larks, because, for example, a lark might actually become active faster in the morning and perhaps even handle physical stress better and easier in the morning. And for an owl to get up and run in the morning, well, I tell you, that's just a heroic 3 times heroic feat. Therefore, consider your own circadian rhythms. By the way, what time do you get up? Are you an owl? Are you a lark? Is it comfortable for you to get up in the morning, or do you try to get up later? Write about it in the comments and we with you perhaps will have some discussion when and how it is better to get up. I promised you that I would tell you about the owl-lark test. In general, who is this owl and lark? The lark's internal biological clock runs a bit faster. A person wants to go to sleep earlier and accordingly get up earlier. And the owl's internal biological rhythms lag behind. Let's say it's midnight, astronomically speaking. But the owl thinks it's 10 p.m., so it's understandable that it doesn't want to fall asleep. And in the morning, let's say 7 o'clock in the morning, and on the owl's internal clock, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and it can't wake up. A test exists that predicts if you are an owl or a lark based on your answers to a set of questions. And depending on this, you can adjust your life activity more to the morning or more to the evening. And maybe even understand that those recommendations that are tailored for larks and you are an owl, they are just not for you. In the description to this video, you can find a link to the test. Take it, fill it out, and this test will immediately give the results, and you can adjust your lifestyle to a certain extent according to these results. More interesting and useful information can be found on my channel about healthy sleep and sleep disorders. Subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss my new interesting videos.